Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, how a zero-day vulnerability ended up being responsible for several popular wikis going offline this week, how Polish researchers managed to hide secret messages in Skype, and how you can quit your job without screwing over your successor, plus a big batch of your questions, our answers, and a heck of a lot more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 92 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on January 10th, 2013. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And that live stream is brought to you by ScaleEngine.com, which is awesome. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the teacher, and the tech, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey, man. Happy episode 92 to you. Guess what,
Yes.
Alan? Guess
What's
what?
that?
We got a big show today. We got a big show. We got a war story we're going to get
Excuse
to.
me.
We got crazy roundup stories we're going to get to, but the news is just massive. Big show, Alan. Big show. I don't know how you do it every single week. Maybe
Hard
with
work.
some sort of amazing time machine where you travel
If
back
only
in
I had
time.
a time machine.
So what you do is right before the show starts, you travel back in time, and then you prep for like 3 days straight, and then you arrive back here at the original starting point with the entire show ready to go. That's the only way I can figure you can make such a big show every week. It's
Yeah.
the only way. All right. Well, until I unravel the mysteries of how you prepare, should we start with our first news story?
Sure.
I saw this one rolling around on our subreddit initially, coming in as individual stories. This wiki has been shut down. This wiki has been shut down. What's going on here?
So there was a zero-day vulnerability in the wiki software called MoinMoin, which is a weird name for software, but anyway.
Yeah, it is.
Yes. So it's a Python-based application called MoinMoin, and it runs a lot of large wikis, including
Dun, dun, dun,
the
dun.
Python wiki, the Debian wiki, and the FreeBSD wiki. After the zero-day came out, the Debian wiki and Python wikis were compromised. And actually, I think on the Python one, all the files were deleted, including all the history. On the Debian one, the password database was dumped and a bunch of other stuff.
Ouch.
And so, because of that, FreeBSD shut down their wiki to make sure it didn't get compromised.
Right. Just preemptively, we're just taking it offline for a bit.
So they basically made Varnish throw a 503 error page, and
I like that they
locked it
start out
down.
the message with, hey. Just, hey.
Which one is this?
In the FreeBSD mailing list.
this?
Yeah.
Yes.
That's how the notification they're taking the wiki offline. Nice and formal there. Hey.
Yeah.
All right, continue on.
Well, it's the wiki. What do you want? Or it's the mailing list. It's meant for people.
That's
to
what's
talk
great
to.
about them, right? What are
Yep.
you notating over there?
I know there was a space that was breaking the markdown code.
Yeah, I know.
I forgot an opening bracket at the top of the story, which probably made a total mess of it.
I know this. But I just continued on.
Why didn't you fix it anyway? So yes, it compromised the Python wiki and the Debian wiki and caused the FreeBSD wiki to be shut down, which was really inconvenient because that was the day I was trying to look up a bunch of stuff on the wiki.
Oh, are you serious?
Yes.
Go figure.
I was playing a bit with Beehive and I was answering questions in the Freenode FreeBSD chat room, and people kept asking questions. I'm like, the answer you're looking for is on the FreeBSD wiki. You just have to wait till tomorrow for it to be back up.
Huh. Wow. Well, now you got to keep a local copy from now on.
Yeah. So importantly, if you have an account on any wiki that is powered by MoinMoin, because it may have been compromised and the password database may have been taken, it is recommended that you change your password on that account. I think the Debian and Python ones are forcing a password reset anyway. But if you have an account on any MoinMoin wiki, you should probably reset your password. And if you use the old password on any other service, you should change that password there as well. And you should also stop using the same password on more than one site.
Mm-hmm. Last pass.
Yeah. And if because of that, the possibility of a threat, you should definitely reset the password for any wiki that's powered by MoinMoin.
Like I said, we just saw them trickle in throughout the week. Thank you to our submitters over at links.techsnap.tv, the subreddit that can power the show. And you guys were on top of this stuff as it was happening. And it was funny.
I didn't hear about it except for through the FreeBSD chat room. It was like, I
Right.
tried to, wiki was down, I see the message, and then somebody's like, oh, it's because the Debian wiki got hacked, and so we shut ours down. I'm like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I want to cover this on TechSNAP. Do you happen to have a link to the story from Debian? And they're like, oh, here.
Oh, yeah,
It's like,
yeah.
aha. And then I put it in the show notes.
It was interesting, too, because you could see the commenters in the TechSNAP subreddit are starting to kind of put it together. They're like, boy, okay, we've seen this one go down. Now we have the FreeBSD one that's going offline. And it was fun to kind of watch this happen. So I really appreciate the submitters to the subreddit. Thank you for doing that and helping us follow this throughout the week. And just a plug for the show. Like, if you love the content we cover, there's additional stories that don't make it into the show over at links.techsnap.tv.
Because the other one, somebody was asking what moin means, and I have no idea.
It's weird.
A name for some software, but that's what it's called. So.
I heard people using this as an excuse to take a few pot shots at Python. I don't
have
Python
anything
is a
against
web application.
Python. It's just both Python and Ruby are a lot harder to run, like multi-tenant, to have a whole bunch of customers running apps compared to PHP.
Yeah.
PHP was kind of designed for that kind of shared web hosting type environment, whereas Ruby and Python apps seem to be designed more, you have to have a virtual dedicated server for each app. Or, there's kind of a way you can hack it to run two apps on the same server, but it's not. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're very different.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All right. Should we go to the next story?
Yep.
All right. So this next headline definitely caught my attention because it sounded pretty out there. I guess there's a way to hide a message in the Skype silence?
Yes. So some Polish researchers have basically devised a way to hide information with steganography in the special packet Skype sends to represent silence instead of talking.
Oh, I see. Because Skype isn't actually... It's
right. So a group of researchers at the Warsaw University of Technology, where I was a couple months ago, where EuroBSDCon was hosted, basically they've developed a way to communicate in secret using the silences in a Skype call. So basically, when Skype transmits the voice data, like it is for me to Chris right now, it does so in little 130-byte packets, right? Because it's trying to keep the latency down, so it sends them in, very short clips.
Right.
But if I'm not talking, it sends a packet that's only 70 bytes that says this was silence. Basically, in order to avoid all the background noise and buzzing and hissing and so on that you would get if you just sent a recording of silence, it compresses that and just sends a thing noting there's silence, right? Because it can't send nothing because then it wouldn't know the difference between silence and packet loss and so on. And so they have this little 70-byte packet. But these researchers have created a piece of software called Skyde, which is kind of a portmanteau of Skype hide.
Clever play on words, I guess.
And it's funny because Skype was originally Skyper because it was Sky Peer, and it became Skype.
Ah, yes.
Skype. So Skype hide becoming Skyde is like such an iteration. It's kind of interesting. Anyway, it runs on your computer and it intercepts those little silence packets and replaces them with an encrypted message instead. And on the other end, the software decrypts the hidden message and gets back the original text, audio, or video, or whatever's being hidden. And then, your Skype client sees the silence and continues on its way. So while you're having a regular discussion, in all the little silence packets that come, because they're like, it's every 100 milliseconds or less or whatever, the hidden messages are indistinguishable from a regular silence packet. So someone listening on the wire or something can't tell that there's hidden messages going across in those silence packets.
Aha. So this is what this was really about.
And it allows data to be transferred at up to 1 kilobit per second, which is only 120 bytes per second. So probably not real useful for doing like real-time audio. Like we couldn't be hiding a second conversation in it.
Right.
But it could be sending text messages or a file or a recording or something. We're going to have a Skype call for 2 hours. And when you think of the silence packets, you remember that only one of us is usually talking at a time. So that means there's silence packets coming from the other side all the time.
Right.
Right? So, when I'm talking, Chris is sending me a silence packet every 100 milliseconds or more. So that means that there's quite a few silence packets going on here.
Yeah.
And so there's an opportunity to be in, a 2-hour Skype call like we're going to end up having for TechSNAP. We probably could have transferred a decent-sized file. in secret.
Oh, wonder what we should send. Maybe the recipes to some barbecue. And then if anybody, for somehow ever actually did manage to decrack it, they'd be like, oh, it's just a barbecue recipe? That's boring.
Yeah, or like the show notes. It's like, oh, they post these on the internet. But the researchers will be presenting all the details of their system at the first ACM workshop on information hiding and multimedia security in France in June.
Oh, we got to wait till June?
Yeah, I don't know if they actually have a paper out yet, or I think they're still in the process of building it. But I have a link here, and you may be able to find more information on it.
Okay.
But they're going to be presenting at a conference in France in June.
All right, so we'll keep an ear out for it. If you guys out there see something, maybe submit to the subreddit. You mentioned, that's just a perfect opportunity for a plug. Our Skype call will be 2 hours long. Now, the observant audience member out there might have noticed that this is not a 2 hour long show, although it is often a very long show.
Yeah.
And actually, our call might actually be longer than 2 hours. If you join us live on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is 4 Eastern over jblive.tv for the video or jblive.info for audio, so it's easy to listen at your desk or while you're on the go from your mobile. And you do get a lot more show, and you can interact with us. We have a live chat room going that we chat with, like Alan is chatting with right now. And we have sort of a back-and-forth dialogue, and we can make instant updates to the stories or fill in additional information. It's a great way to engage with the show. So jblive.tv or jblive.info, 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern on Thursdays.
Also, people in the chat room also get to suggest the title for the episode, which is what I was just doing.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we have a whole voting system that it's user generated the titles for this show and for a few of our other shows too. All right, Alan, should we go to the serious password reset hole that was found in a quote unquote secure FTP? Is it a server or service?
I'm not entirely clear on exactly what it is. It's a cloud.
Yeah, yeah, it's one of those.
It's a cloud file transfer service client application thing. I'm not. Called Excellion, and it has a glaring password reset bug in it. So a security researcher was investigating Facebook as part of their bug bounty program, just poking around, seeing what he could find or whatever.
Right.
And he stumbled upon a bug that allowed him to reset the password of any Facebook user whose email he knew.
Wow, that does seem like quite the bug.
Yes. So basically, he would log in with his account and go through the process to reset his password. But in the final HTTP post that you would send to the service, you just replace a couple of variables and you can reset someone else's password.
Oh, like there's variables for like % username, % password.
There's one for the 2 copies of, there's one each for the 2 copies of your password and one for the email address. And then to verify your identity, there's a cookie. Except for the cookie just contains refer equals and then the base64 encoded version of your email address. So you can just base64 encode someone else's email address,
right?
And it runs that command as that user.
Yep.
There's no real authentication here. It's literally horrible programming. The bug turned out to actually be in Excellion, not in Facebook, which is, Excellion's a mobile file sharing app. Like they provide apps that go on like iPhone and Android and so on and allow you to upload files to Facebook through it and so on. And they also allow very large files, apparently up to 100 gigabytes or something, which Dropbox doesn't because, it's designed for private cloud instances as well, companies that need to do stuff internally or whatever.
Yeah, okay.
But because of that, so they claim they've had this bug fixed since March. But
really?
People running private cloud instances that haven't updated their version of the Excellion app will still be vulnerable to it.
So this was something that Facebook had, so that way for their employees to use, right? And they ran their own instance of it, kind of a thing.
Well, I think it was eventually for all Facebook users. It's just I'm not. It's a little unclear on the details, but it was for there. It was an internal server that was being tested against.
Yeah,
but this guy's an outside researcher, so I imagine, it was something that eventually probably all Facebook users were going to end up having.
Huh. Jeez.
Yeah. So basically, the only security was this cookie that was just a base64 encoded version of your email address. It should have been something more secure, like even at a minimum, the MD5 of the email address and some secret key, so that I, as the attacker, not knowing the secret key, can't come up with the token for some other person's email address. Right? I know your email address, but I don't know the secret key to combine them together to make the MD5 hash. That would work. But when it's just a base 64 in code, I can do that. Anybody can do that.
Yeah.
So to show how easy it is, there's a YouTube video that actually demonstrates the guy doing the attack. He goes to the page, types in his email address or whatever, starts the reset process, uses like a plugin for the browser. There's one called Tamper Data for Firefox, and basically when you turn it on, every time you try to submit something to a website, it allows you to edit what you're sending first. And so he just edits it, changes the password and the username in the post variables, and then changes the cookie slightly to have the base 64 encode of the target email address instead of his own, and he resets that person's password. And, that shouldn't be happening, but it was. And the link has more details and talks about a bit more about the timeline and so on.
It's so funny how these quote-unquote secure services, who wrote this? Who wrote that? Who did that?
Base 64 isn't any kind of encryption or obfuscation even. It's just a way to pass a data that may contain, binary or like Unicode characters or something as something that's just numbers and letters. Right? It was designed for things like email and SSL certificates, where you needed to be able to have them in some nice, clean, plain text way, but still allow them to contain binary data.
Right.
So when you attach a PDF file to an email, it gets converted to all text. It's just uppercase and lowercase letters and numbers and 2 symbols, and that's it. Like underscore and dash or plus and slash, depending if it's for web or for email. And so basically, it encodes 8-bit data into 7 bits, so basically makes it 33% larger, but lets you, it would be 6 bits. Anyway, encode a PDF file into plain text so you can include it as part of an email or whatever. That's what it was designed to do. It's not any way of encrypting or anything.
Right.
And
stop using the wrong tool for the wrong jobs, people.
Yep.
Dang it. All right, Alan. Well, before we move on to our John McAfee story, which we haven't really covered a lot of the John McAfee stuff on this show.
No, because most of it was just crazy and speculative and crazy.
Yeah. But we want to get to that. But before we do, let's take a quick break and thank our sponsor this week, GoDaddy.com, longtime sponsors of the TechSNAP program. And GoDaddy has extended a very special offer, which will be expiring soon, and that is the $2.95.com. Yes, my friend, you heard me correctly, $2.95 for a .com. When you're checking out over at GoDaddy.com, use the code TECH295. When you're buying, you get the .com. Up to 3 of those puppies for $2.95 when you check out. And that is such an awesome, awesome deal. But maybe, just maybe, you're not getting a .com. I know it's crazy. I just bought jbgame.tv. .tv. That's not a .com. Yep. That's not a .com. Or maybe you want to get some hosting. I know there's some folks in the chat room who've been talking about this. We have a great discount. If you want to just get 20% off the top of whatever you're doing, getting a .tv, sure. Getting some hosting, sure. Getting an SSL, sure. Just use our code GO20 off 5 when you check out. GO20 off 5 when you check out. GO20 off 5 when you check out. You get 20% off whatever you're getting. Just take 20% off. What are you doing?
Were you going to say it 5 times or what?
What do you got? What do you got? You got something better to do than take 20% off? Why don't you take 20% off? What's the matter with you? Take 20% off with GO20 off 5. There we go. I want to set a new record, Alan. What can I say? Anyways, so thank you to GoDaddy.com for supporting the TechSNAP program. And thank you to everybody who visits those links in the show notes to thank GoDaddy or uses those promo codes when they're checking out to support this show. We really do appreciate it, and it helps us keep on moving right along. Speaking of moving right along, should we move on to our John McAfee story?
Sure.
All right. Lay it on me, Alan. What's going on here?
So this is basically based on a blog post from John McAfee in a story I've titled The One-Man Intelligence Agency.
That's good, man.
And so a little caveat before the story. This is all based on stuff he wrote, so I'm not vouching for the validity of it, and I don't have any external sources or anything. And I'm not sure that everything here is true, but it's more about the thought experiment of how these type of things can be done.
I'm with you.
And how basically anyone could be a spy.
So even if we're not 100% sure what he's saying actually happened in all cases, it seems definitely plausible, and it's at least worth considering. Yeah,
the best way to understand how to protect yourself is to understand what the attacks look like.
Right, yeah.
And so that's kind of why I decided to cover this story.
Okay.
So for those of you who don't know, John McAfee is a British-American computer programmer who originally founded McAfee Incorporated, which was the company that makes a virus scanner. It was acquired by Intel in 2010 for like $7-point-something billion.
Yeah.
On April 30th of 2012, John McAfee's home in Belize, which is in South America, was raided by the Gang Suppression Unit. Apparently they shot his dog and raided his house and took a bunch of his stuff, but he was never actually charged with any crime, and it's since not really gone anywhere. Although if you keep following, in November of last year, he was accused of murdering his neighbor or something, and there were a warrant out, and he ran off to a neighboring country, Guatemala, I think, and is attempting to, and has since been deported back to the U.S. Anyway, after the incident in April, John McAfee decided to start fighting back against the government. So in the story here, we have
the Belize government?
Yes. So we have some highlights from his blog post detailing what he claims were his activities against the Belize government and what he managed to find using them.
Okay.
So he starts, he said, but he went and purchased 75 inexpensive laptops and then infected them with some malware that did things like log keystrokes, remotely activate the webcam, remotely activate the microphone, and then report all that stuff back to his servers. Then he put the laptops back in the original packaging and sealed them so it didn't look like they had been opened.
Sure.
And then he began giving these laptops away as gifts to certain people, like government employees, police officers, assistants to government ministers, girlfriends of powerful men, boyfriends of powerful women, etc.
I mean, he's literally saying, I purchased 75 cheap laptops and computer. I mean, he's saying, I did this.
Yes, so he bought 75 cheap laptops, infected them with malware, and started giving them away to people he thought either had information he would want or were close to people that would have information he would want.
Yeah.
If you give somebody's girlfriend a laptop where you can activate the microphone, you might be able to overhear something your original target is actually saying.
Like the chat room says, JBViewer2, I guess he wasn't worried about McAfee finding the malware anyways.
Well, he probably, he didn't install a virus scanner on his laptop.
Of course not.
Take him away. Anyway, he also hired social engineers to get close to certain people and infect their existing computers, right? So if somebody already has a computer, instead of giving them one, you just, pay someone to get close to that person and infect their computer.
Right.
And also to change settings on their cell phones. You borrow someone's cell phone for a minute to make a call or something, and what you actually do is go in there and change their settings to say not automatically delete old text messages. So that you borrow their cell phone again later sometime down the road and you can read all their old text messages instead of them automatically being deleted.
Mm-hmm.
Or, automatically whether or not to save sent text messages and so on. Anyway, once he had these keyloggers in place and reporting back to him, he was able to gain access to information like usernames and passwords for email accounts, Facebook, internal government websites, and anything else, right? As well as, if you're typing an email, he would be able to see the keys as you type them. Or even like a live chat, whether it's over Skype or Facebook or whatever chat service, right? So even if the emails eventually get deleted, or something, right? If you're sending or remember if we talked about the Russian spy ring, they would write the emails, save them as a draft.
Yeah.
And then another person would log into the same account and delete the draft so the email was never actually sent.
That's what Broadwell and Petraeus were doing too.
Exactly. Well, with that system, if you have a keylogger, you can still see it as it's being typed. And even though it gets erased later or never sent or whatever, you still have copies of it.
Yeah.
And then, he would be able to remotely say, turn on the webcam once every 10 minutes and take a picture. Or turn on the microphone and make it record whenever it detects speaking, and then send those files to him later. So, at one point he caught a Facebook chat between two people and, managed to infect the other party with the virus and then take pictures of both of them.
He claims that he did this himself?
Well, no, he hired a bunch of people to help him because he couldn't do it all himself.
Okay.
The laptop.
Yeah.
Apparently, he had as many as 26 people working for him trying to deal with all the data he would capture with all this key logging and so on.
Wow.
Yeah. It's nice to have money, eh?
I mean, yeah, I suppose if this is real, this is crazy to me.
Yeah. But, you could definitely see a government-sponsored agency that could afford to do this to being able to do things like this.
Oh, yeah.
And also, when you're talking second and third world countries, it's much easier to hire someone to do stuff like reading text files and forwarding the useful bits to you.
Right. Absolutely.
Right? The minimum wage is a lot less in some of these places.
That's a great point. Because, there are services now that you can outsource like somebody to read your email and send you important ones and do kind of online tasks for you now. And all of those jobs are pretty much in third world type countries, or close to it.
Yes. Now, the more interesting stuff is some of the stuff he claims to have found about the Belize government issuing fake passports.
Oh, really?
So basically, we find that there was, human trafficking in Belize has been a big thing for a while.
Yeah.
But he says he managed to compromise some certain people in the Ministry of Immigration and find that each month about 10 or so people from Lebanon come into Belize and are issued fake passports and then go on to somewhere else.
Oh, really?
Now,
like
under regular law, you have to be a resident for 5 years or more to get a passport.
Yeah.
But these people are coming in and getting a passport in a couple of days and then moving on to somewhere else.
Like they're using it as like to what?
Well, in this
like
case,
they're coming from.
Yeah. In this case, it looks like Lebanese members, possibly of Hezbollah, going through Belize to get to training camps in Nicaragua and then moving into the U.S. under false passports with non-Arabic sounding names.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And there's a little bit of I managed to follow a chain of things and find little hints about something like that on WikiLeaks cables from the embassy in Belize. That they've heard about this type of thing happening before. So
yeah, I've heard stories about it too.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. But mostly the reason I wanted to cover the story was just some of the, how easy it is to put a little keylogging malware on someone's computer and read their email and find out what their email password is and log into it and be able to take over people's Skype, Facebook account and
right.
So even if somebody has good Facebook security settings, if you log in as them, you can see everything.
I mean, it's possible he did all this stuff. I mean, he obviously is a smart guy, and he obviously was involved at the early stages of McAfee, which was early on pretty advanced software, I guess.
Yep. He's a computer programmer, and he has lots of money, but he also appears to be entirely crazy.
To me, okay, so what it tells me is rich people are going to start to be able to afford their own private intelligence espionage service. But with the scary,
we talked about private ones before, actually, like companies.
I was just going to say, yeah,
as intelligence agencies and selling the data to governments and
that's
companies.
Scarier to me. That is much scarier. I mean, it's scary to think that guys like John McAfee could pull this off, but the scary thing is there's companies out there making a lot of money doing this.
Yeah, basically spying on people.
Yeah, and there's well-known companies hire these.
Unlike the government, they're not restricted by things like wiretapping laws.
Right.
Now, technically what they're doing is illegal, but they have to get caught first.
Yeah, and they don't have quite the bureaucracy to go through to get it all going, and what makes it really easier is
they can get away with it with a lot less paper trail.
And if they go through all of these hoops and do all of these right things, they can look legitimate, they can look certified, and then they actually can become government contractors. They can, companies like Blackwater, which later became Academy, have now started doing this. I mean, so we've got defense contractors that have moved into this intelligence business. You've got rich people that are doing it.
And as far as the government's concerned, they're maybe have the ability to do things that it would be too hard to do with the internal intelligence agencies.
Oh yeah.
It's like, right, well, if we ask the CIA to do this, they can't work inside the U.S. borders. Or, if we ask this intelligence agency, then there's certain restrictions about what they can do. Whereas if we just contract this out to Blackwater, they can do whatever they want.
The other thing you can't really completely discount is, in some ways, groups like Anonymous sort of act a little bit as an intelligence gathering. I mean, they're a little more brute force about it.
There was a story there from them that I didn't end up covering about. There were some videos posted on Facebook of a crime happening, and then the people that posted got smart and deleted it.
Yeah.
But Anonymous was able to basically get it back because those videos are actually served up through a CDN. Yeah. And so even once you delete them from Facebook, where Facebook probably doesn't necessarily delete everything right away, the CDN has it cached. And so if you have the HTML or whatever of if you have the link to the video from when it was still posted, you can still get a copy of it.
Yep.
And that was handed over to law enforcement and was used as evidence in the case.
So we have these. I mean, I don't want to do as much hyperbole as saying information is becoming a new form of currency, but in some ways, you do have.
Well, it always has been.
You have information industries, though, that before would have to be much more physical in their approach. With physical phone tapping and tracking, but now so much is done online. You can just do it remotely.
Now, the John McAfee case was a bit of both. Like,
it was.
You could actually have little recording devices that record like an SD card.
He had access to the laptops, and he preloaded the software on the laptops.
Or in this, he pay people to go and hang out or try to sleep with people that he was targeting and plant recording devices in their house.
Yeah.
It was like super James Bondy.
It's pretty wild. Pretty wild. You gotta just, you know what? You just gotta keep an eye out and see, if we start seeing more stories like this, which we probably will, maybe in a few years we'll look back and just go, yeah, of course that's what McAfee was doing. Of course he did all that stuff. That makes sense. Can't believe we even questioned it. I mean, that might be the future. Who knows? We'll see where it goes.
But he's got there's some screenshots and recordings of phone calls and stuff on that blog post.
We got a link to the blog post in the show notes, and he does provide.
If you want to dig into it, go ahead. I just wanted to cover some of the more technical side of what was going on there because I found it interesting.
Have a drink, smoke a doobie, then jump in. That's my recommendation. Or if you're like Alan, have a glass of water. Right, Alan? All right.
Sure.
Now, any other thoughts on that story before we move on?
Nope.
All right. Well, I want to mention, because we never really mentioned it here on the show, that we have Android apps available. So if you want to grab these shows like TechSNAP on the go over to the Play Market, whatever they call it, the Android Play Store, and search for Jupiter Broadcasting. The two I want to call out are Callisto, which is always getting better and better, and you can find it over at callisto-app.com too. And you get the back catalog of our audio shows. You can join the live radio stream. You can chat with us. You can even donate directly or contact us. It's a really great app. And then also we have another great app if you have a little more powerful Android device, let's say, something like that. You can get Shane's app over there. Just search for Jupiter Broadcasting, and it can do some video streams. Also, it can also do the live stream. So that's always really cool. So a couple of different ways to get Jupiter Broadcasting on the go on your Android device. And don't forget, we do have, if you go over to jblive.tv on your iOS device, there's a link right there on the page to watch the stream right in Safari. It just works automatically. And if you would like to help keep these shows on the air while you're shopping, or before you shop, actually, visit the links at the bottom of our website. We have links down there for Amazon and eBay and Netflix and Newegg and ThinkGeek and Best Buy and Audible, which I love, and Code School, which helps you learn by doing. And we have our Chrome and Firefox extensions. The Chrome extension was just updated to add Canada support, which, did you see, Canada just got Prime?
I did not know that.
Prime is so awesome, Alan.
I'm going to sign up for that.
I mean, I don't know if you guys get the videos yet, but you get like the super fast delivery plus the super nice discount on the overnight or 2-night delivery. So if you're a big Amazon,
interesting is if they finally give us the largest selection of stuff, like being able to buy your non-perishable type groceries on Amazon, because right now or previously you couldn't get any of that stuff in Canada.
Now, my tip for you is when you're searching for stuff, once you get Prime, on the left-hand side,
Prime only box.
You got it, buddy. That's what you do right there.
I miss having that just because I usually want to buy something directly from Amazon, so I can, and not necessarily from one of the other places that sells on Amazon.
The shipping is always a lot more solid when it comes from Amazon. I mean,
even if it's just fulfilled by Amazon, because it means it's already in the Amazon warehouse.
Right.
It's just, it solves me. And it means that they will ship it to Canada, whereas some of the random sellers that sell stuff on Amazon won't necessarily ship to Canada.
That sucks. Yeah, that's good too. So anyways, if you're going to be shopping at Amazon, you can either use our link before you shop or just grab that browser extension and it'll tag it for your country automatically. And it'll just happen while you're shopping. You don't even have to think about it. And that's the way we keep the advertising down to a minimum. And we continue to do the shows that you guys love. And if it doesn't appeal to a sponsor, if they don't get us, it doesn't matter because you guys do. And that's why we have that affiliate system. And we really do appreciate it.
And, the affiliate system couldn't be any easier. You don't have to give us money. You just do your regular shopping and it happens.
All right, Alan. Well, I think that's all our news, right?
Yep.
All right. Then you know what that means. It's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your emails to techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of our website. And you can also submit a thread on our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. In fact, that's where several of our feedbacks come from today. But Alan, before we start, we have a war story today, don't we?
Yes, we do.
All right, sir. Lay it on me.
So Ben, a viewer of the show, wrote in because he noticed we haven't had a war story in a while, so he sent one in for us.
Aw, thank you, Ben.
So the following is Ben's war story.
Okay.
In the summer of 2005, he was attending the University of Wisconsin for a 2-year community college diploma and working in IT at the same time. So the entire IT department at this particular campus consisted of his boss, who was the everything admin, himself, and one other student.
Yeah.
And the place was jinxed. Basically, every time the boss left for any reason at all, everything would break.
Oh, I hate that.
You know how it is. It happens to everybody. Whether it's, the ISP having an outage or a power failure or fiber patches that would just die for no reason or whatever.
For me, it's always the custom scripts. The custom scripts always break for me.
It's always something that requires specifically your attention, and it waits until the least convenient possible time.
Yep. That's the universe screwing me.
Yeah. So, needless to say, he was a bit worried when his boss announced that he'd be going on a fishing trip in Canada for 2 weeks and have no cell phone.
Canada. Dun, dun, dun.
So if anything broke, we'd basically be on their own to handle it or would have to contact the higher-ups in the Madison office.
Right.
So the cursed week starts. Everything runs smoothly Monday and Tuesday. So they're starting to think that they may just squeak through. That was their first mistake.
Uh-oh.
Anyway, they arrived at work on Wednesday morning, and the dean meets them at the door, which is never, the high-up executives waiting for you to arrive is not how you want to start the day.
That's bad.
Informed them that the power had gone out overnight, and none of the admin staff had access to their voicemail. So, not pleased to hear that as, he had never touched the voicemail system before.
Right.
So he didn't know anything about it.
And his head's going, okay, what would cause that outage? What could cause that? What would do that? As he's talking to the guy, I'm sure.
Yeah. So the other student employee hadn't touched any of it either. And so they both had no idea how anything works in this voice system. And so they kind of had to start making guesses and so on.
Yeah.
To make things even worse, their office phones were completely dead as well.
So I wonder if, at this point, you've got to be thinking maybe something never turned back on, right? Maybe the UPS died, something like that.
Yep. So the phone system on the campus was made up of 2 small Nortel DMS 100 switches. The first one was installed sometime in the 80s and was almost full. That one serviced the old building on campus. The newer building was serviced by a newer DMS 100, and that's where the phones in the building he was in, where all the phones were dead. And it also had the voicemail module. So he powered on a serial terminal that was connected to the DMS 100 and found an error message indicating the source of the problem. One of the fans in the chassis had failed, and the unit wasn't going to boot up until the fan was replaced to avoid overheating.
Okay.
So he says Nortel could use a few lessons on making parts replaceable.
Oh.
He said it took him 10 minutes of tinkering to get the front panel off and find the failed fan in the unit. And they found the fan was completely seized up. A few more minutes with a screwdriver, and they managed to get the fan removed. It looked like a standard 120 millimeter case fan, but then they noticed it was 24 volt instead of the usual 12 or 5. So it wasn't going to be simple to replace. So he called down to the Madison head office and talked to one of the admins there. Naturally, this particular unit hadn't been covered by a service contract for at least the last 5 years, so they didn't really have any spare parts or anything.
Right.
So they're just like, see what you can come up with.
Oh my gosh.
So they did some Googling and found a fan that might work, but it didn't have the speed sensor and so on and so on. You thought about going to Radio Shack and trying to build a regulator to make a 12-volt fan work in a 24-volt, but, it was beyond his technical means, and Radio Shack didn't really have anything pre-built and so on. So they kind of thought they were dead. Meanwhile, his coworker was fooling around with the dead fan and managed to get it to start spinning again. So it didn't spin very well, but it was actually spinning again. So they went back downstairs and remounted the fan into the unit, power cycled the chassis, while the other guy used a can of compressed air to keep the fan spinning. And success, the switch boots up. So they quickly unhook the dying fan so it won't short anything out or cause any other problems.
Yeah.
Luckily, there's no line cards behind that particular fan, so it wasn't going to cause heat issues. And anyway, they got it booted up and stable. So the bosses of Madison were impressed that they managed to get it working, and they said that they would try to find a replacement fan for it. When he left the IT department a year later, there was still a can of compressed air on top of the switch in case the power went out, and they had never got a replacement part.
Wow.
And he also says, thanks for the continued efforts with TechSNAP, LAS, Unfiltered, Coder Radio, SciByte, FoShow, and so on. And
shows keep me company when the dog is running me after work.
Yes. And he also notes that he's a subscriber and is a serial affiliate user.
Well, Ben, thanks for that great story. And Alan, it reminds me back. I was working with a guy who we took an old server chassis, an old Super Micro chassis, good one.
Yep.
And pulled all the parts out of it, and then put an expander card in there, and then just loaded it with drives. Right, the front. There was just an unbelievable amount of drives, and we turned it on. It was running really good overnight. The RAID was getting all set up, and we got in this morning. We got in the next morning. And, the temperature alarm was going off. It just kept going off and off. Well, this wasn't a critical box. We just needed to move some data onto it for the day so that way we could redo another array. So we opened up the machine, took the cover off, propped it up in our office, this thing was super loud, and we took jumpers. And because we had to pull these fans out to fit all these drives in there, and we just jumpered the plug so the motherboard detected a fan, but there was no actual fan there.
Yeah.
And then we just ran it with a fan pointed, like an actual stand fan pointed at it, because we just really needed it for like 8 hours to run, and then it could blow up for all we cared. And so if you walked into our office, we had this massive machine kind of propped up on its side a little bit with this big floor fan just blowing air on it, and we just ran it like that for the whole day.
The fan's fairly loud, but the machine is just like, it's insane.
Yeah, we couldn't take calls.
I
in the
had
office.
one of them running over here, and it's just like, after a couple hours, you finally turn it off, and it's like,
you realize it was drilling into your brain. Actually,
yes,
it actually does.
It's sometimes I swear a jackhammer isn't as loud.
Yeah, it's that high pitched noise.
And there's like this slight like warble to it.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Especially the 1U ones, because instead of standard like 80 or 120 millimeter fans,
right? They got those tiny
little like 40 or 60 millimeter fans, and it's just like
yeah.
Or the worst one, the 2U one, it's got 4 of those, but they're double stacked, so it's actually got 8.
Oh my gosh!
So there's 2 of them like stuck like end to end, counter rotating to push more air.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
Yeah, they're like 2-stage fans or something. And so just the noise and the warble is that much more because there are 2 fans working together, and there's 4 sets of them.
Like Tor Dog says, like if you have a server room and the AC goes out, I mean, you really hear those things kick up. It's yeah.
Or a lot of them, because the temperature sensor hasn't kicked in yet, when you first boot them up, they go to 100%.
Right.
And it's just like, and you what like the one was so crazy that they include this piece of plastic, like hard plastic, like
the
acrylic,
airflow director
that sits on top, so that you can take the cover off to service it without disturbing the airflow.
Yeah.
Like a lot of the machines, if you're going to don't leave the machine on if you're going to take the cover off for more than 5 minutes, because the airflow isn't going to go straight across. It's going to go out, and then you're not going to cool the CPU. Because like in a 1 or 2U case, there's not enough room for a fan on top of the CPU. So the case fans blow air from front to back over the CPU.
Right.
And there's no fan directly on the CPU like you would in a normal PC.
Yeah.
So without this shroud in place, you're going to overheat the machine. So they have the shroud there so that, specifically in the Supermicro models I was looking at, you can hot swap the fans. The fans have pinch points. You pinch the 2 points and it pops out.
Yep.
It's a standard fan. You plug it back in and you connect the power connector, and then it makes the regular slide-on power connector into a hot swap power connector, and you drop it back in.
Yeah, they're really nice. Yeah, that's kind of what this case had.
But when the fans are at full bore, it's enough. It actually levitates the acrylic shroud. Like this shroud is more than a foot long and more than a foot wide. It's not a light piece of acrylic.
Right.
And it's like levitating by like the one end picked up by more than an inch off of its resting position because of the amount of airflow coming out of these 4 or 8 fans.
Levitating shrouds are just features, Alan. That's a feature.
Well, yeah, it's showing you how much air they're pushing through this thing when the fans are at full bore.
Yeah. All right, Alan, should we get to our first email this week?
Yep.
All right, it's actually a Reddit submission. I lied. It's not an email. It came from Glitter Gulch. And this is a question I wanted to cover because I think we've either faced it or we will face it. How do I keep from screwing the next guy after I quit? Give me some feedback so I make it easy for the next poor sap. A question for the show. And I'll give you a little background, okay?
Okay.
All right. He says, I work for a small office, about 30 people. I'm the only IT person, and my boss is a pain. He says he's got some big issues. After 3 years on the job, my boss is very cheap, won't spend money. It's like pulling teeth. My office still runs XP, and new people get Win XP with IE6. My boss won't let me change or upgrade. Says it costs too much time and money. Switching to Linux is not an option because people would have to learn something new when 7 is out because it costs too much. Hardly anyone has IT skills at all. I teach more than I do anything else. That's not too uncommon. I do backups, just docs, pictures, and normal office stuff 2 times a day to cloud storage. He also he finds himself fixing junk with more junk. They don't want to buy new machines. And the last point is what do I need while I train my replacement? He's got a very short period of time. What do we think? He doesn't want to be a dick, but he's got extremely limited resources.
So the biggest thing for worrying about your replacement and so on is documentation. Basically, it's best if you write down everything you do when you're setting something up.
Yeah.
So it's a lot harder to remember all the little stuff when you're documenting something after the fact. So, for example, when I was setting up the Open LDAP system that we used for the cafe integration system we built one time to integrate Windows Logon with our web app, I basically wrote down all the commands and stuff as I did them when I was setting this up.
That's a great way to do it.
I had to go back and edit it a bunch of times as all right, that didn't actually work. Let's change this or whatever. But it meant later when it was time to deploy the system from development into production, I followed those instructions again to make sure it all worked like I said it did, right? Actually use my documentation myself to make sure I got all the steps when I was redeploying it too.
This seems like probably a minor point, but when you're doing this, are you like formatting it in a wiki with screenshots, or are you just throwing it in a text file as you go?
It was a Google Doc.
Okay.
If I did it now, it would be done in Markdown instead of plain text.
Yeah. See, I have found I already keep pretty extensive notes because I turn my notes into my bill of materials or whatever you call it when I bill. Yep. But I have found that for me, I write down everything I'm doing, every command, just like you do, URLs that I grab information from, stuff like that. Then, if I have the luxury, I go back later and actually fill out a more complete documentation, either on a wiki page or whatever they use at my client. And even if possible, I try to have somebody validate it if that's not going to be possible.
The best part about this documentation is, say it's you that's on call when something breaks. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. You're going to be very glad you wrote down all the stuff on how to recreate the mail server.
Yeah.
Right? If the mail server explodes and you have to recreate it or restore the backup or whatever, you're going to be really glad you wrote all this down when it's 3 o'clock in the morning and you're trying to remember how you set this up 2 years ago.
Now, my other couple of bits of advice for documentation is focus on the stuff that the replacement, if you have limited time, because he mentions about a short period of time. Focus on the stuff that they can't go Google on themselves. So your ISP account number and contact information, any login stuff, for any websites people need.
Anything custom or weird that you do?
The domain renewal stuff, any of that kind of stuff that they're not going to be able to just figure out without just a little bit of research. Then work your way out from there, of course. And
if you have a custom script that does something.
Oh, yeah.
this is where it is, and this is what it does, and this is, because my biggest fear always when trying to migrate something that someone else ran before is that they have some little secret tiny script that does something critical but small somewhere in there that I'm going to miss when I move, and all of a sudden nothing's going to work.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And we're not going to find out that something wasn't working for a week after I've moved.
Yeah. And then you got to, and maybe now would be a good time, Glitter, to start taking more little meticulous notes. So that way, so say you have 4 weeks there left or 2 weeks there left. When the person comes on, they'll be able to see all of the stuff they're going to get handed that's kind of in progress and the threads are already kind of opened. They'll be able to work back your logic on that and figure out where you're at. And the reason I suggest that's a good idea is a lot of times when you leave a place and something goes wrong, you become the scapegoat guy. Yep. Oh, yeah, Glitter had no idea what he was doing when he ordered that PC with Windows 7. I'm sorry. Well, maybe you had a very good reason. If you document that in your notes, you can't really be used as the scapegoat. They're like, yeah, well, Glitter noted that that scanner doesn't work with XP, and since you need that scanner, we had to get you Windows 7. So let me just go ahead and get this deployed for you. And that kind of helps, too, and it'll help smooth out the transition.
Tourdog in the chat room says, your biggest question when you're looking at anyone else's stuff is, why the hell did he do it like this? Mm-hmm. Right? Like I saw something weird. I mean, I've encountered this before. I was like, why the hell is he doing all this weirdness? Yeah. It was, I remember. I was working at the college and I was taking over for their old admin for their Unix system that all the programming students used. And the weirdest thing, everybody's home directory wasn't owned by each student didn't own their home directory.
Oh.
It was owned by the nobody user, and then the user's group had the group permission. And I was like, why would that ever be like that? And I was this whole thing about fixing it. And then in the end, I find out there was a good reason why that was done. Because that way the student, when they didn't own their home directory, they couldn't change the permissions on their home directory to allow their friend to descend into their home directory. Right? Because this system was used live during exams.
Right.
So they had to prevent students from being able to give each other access to their home directories. Right? So student A couldn't change chmod their home directory 777 or something, so every other student can come in and get a copy of what they were doing. So there was a reason why it was done that way.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't been enlightened to that by someone else there, I would have went through and changed it all. Rewrote all their user creation scripts because it's what are you doing? That's the dumbest. It's no wonder your SSH keys won't work and so on.
This is a huge part of my job is I come in after the IT guys burned out and left. And so usually things are in a bad state. And I end up having to reverse figure out so why did he do it like this? And so many times, I start out.
Something is done in what looks like the dumbest way ever.
Yes.
Look for an explanation.
Yep. That is the funniest thing because
half the time they're just crazy.
Yeah, that's so true too. Yeah, you're absolutely right though.
The other half of the time there was a reason they were doing it that way.
Yep. Even if it seems crazy on the face of it.
So if you're doing something, document not only what it's doing but why it's doing it in a weird way.
Right. Yeah. If that's not how it's normally done, it needs to be written down. All right. Now, this next question, I think I know what your answer is going to be, Alan, but I'm going to throw it at you anyways. It's probably just a quick one. This is coming from BMad in the subreddit, and he wants to run multiple Apache 2 sites on separate servers behind one dynamic IP. I run across multiple articles on how to do this, run it on different ports and things like that. But he wants to do it with each VM and still from the outside, be able to access 80 and 443.
Right. So we've covered this a little bit before, specifically this question, but it's quite simple. On one computer somewhere, you run Nginx or Apache with mod proxy, listening on port 80 or 443. It's really easy to do with Nginx. Anyway, so you set up a separate server block for each of the websites with the host name, right? Basically, when you request a site over HTTP, your client sends an extra header, says host : and then the website, like www.jupiterbroadcasting.com. And that's what allows you to have multiple websites on one IP address, is that the web server can look at the host name and from that figure out which website to show you the content of. So basically you can set up your Nginx to say, all right, run on port 80. If the website they're requesting is www.website1.com, proxy it to this VM's IP address on port 80. Now if I get a request for website 2, proxy it to this other VM on port 80. And if I get a request for website 3, proxy it to localhost on port 8080 or something, and so on. And you can have all these different setups. And you can also declare one of them as default. So if someone comes with a name you don't have specified or goes directly to the IP address, they go to one specific place.
That's a good idea.
But it's really easy to do with Nginx as a reverse proxy.
There you go. All right, Alan.
And the other thing you can do with that is you can in addition to doing them based on the host names to forward to different boxes, you can also do subdirectories, right? You can use the location directive in Nginx. So you could have, if you have a dynamic IP and you just get something like from dynDNS.org, so it's like myserver.dynDNS.org, you can set up /site1, which will go to forward to VM1, and /site2 go to VM2.
Nice.
So it's very, very easy to do with Nginx.
The one bit of information he left out.
I'm sure there's examples on how to do that on ServerFault. ServerFault.com is a question and answer site. It's the same guys that do Stack Overflow, but it's for server admin questions.
If one thing that would have been a little helpful is if he would have told us what router he had, because then we could have told him, at what stage he, because maybe he has pfSense for all we know. Maybe he could do something there.
But most likely, you just port forward port 80 to one machine where you run Nginx.
Yeah.
And then have Nginx forward to the Apaches you have elsewhere.
All right.
And if you're not comfortable with Nginx, you can do it with an extra Apache set up with mod proxy to do the same stuff.
Yes.
But it's not as lightweight.
You just love talking about Nginx. See, I knew throwing an Nginx question in there. It's like throwing.
The other thing is, Nginx or Apache have modules called Real IP. And basically what you can do is, because you're going to be proxying this connection from one server to another, that means that the VMs are going to see all users as coming from the internal IP of the Nginx server.
Right.
So basically you can set it up with the Real IP module where you can say, hey, Nginx, when you proxy it to this VM, add an extra header that says the real IP is the user's real IP. Then on the Apache, inside that VM, you can run, it's called RPAF, RPAF, so real IP or actual forward or something like that. Anyway, it's a module that, and basically you say, if a request comes from my internal IP block and it says that the customer's real IP is whatever, trust that. And that way in your logs and in your applications like your PHP or whatever, it'll see the original requester's IP address rather than the proxy's IP address.
There you go.
That's the only other note I had about that.
Excellent, sir. All right. Now, our last Reddit submission question comes from Dr. Kraz. And he wants to just know, Alan, if you or I have any updated notes on our Ultimate Server series. He says, hey, guys, it's been over a year since you did your Ultimate Server series, and I was wondering how you would update it. And maybe we can think of it in terms of what he needs to do. I'm asking because I want to make a new media/storage server for my home with a 3-year-old computer with 8 gigabytes of RAM and Intel Core 2 Duo 3 gigahertz processor. I've been wanting to sink my teeth into a BSD, so I was really thinking of using FreeBSD for it. But I wanted opinions on what you guys use at home. He says he doesn't have any funds to buy a dedicated NAS box, and he'd also love to hear anyone's opinions, for that matter, on what they do at home for media storage servers. And there's a thread if you guys want to join in on that.
Mine is a regular FreeBSD 9.0. I haven't updated to 9.1 yet. Mine happens to have 16 gigs of RAM, but that's because I want to be able to run VMs as well. As long as you have 2 is enough, 4 is better. Anything more than that is just gravy. You can run ZFS and combine all your drives together. You can decide if you want to just do a single storage pool with no redundancy, or if you want to set up like RAID Z1. And it's awesome. It's like I have 4 3-terabyte drives in there, and I get 400 or 500 megabytes per second read speeds sequential.
Well, I want to give a hearty plug for Windows Home Server or Server 2012 Essentials. Anybody? Anybody? No. Okay. All right. You guys know what I want to plug.
If you want other people to be able to use it, FreeNAS is nice.
That's what. Yeah, I say go FreeNAS. If you're not a current FreeBSD user, start a little gentle. Put the training wheels on a little bit. FreeNAS is a great way to set up storage. It's got a nice UI. He didn't say how much storage. Again, a key piece of information, but it also gives you nice stats, which us geeks love to geek out at.
Yep. Like basically my home server used to consist of a FreeBSD box with 2 gigs of RAM, and it had a bunch of different size hard drives all striped together with no redundancy. Right? I had like I had a 200 gig, two 300 gigs, and two 1.5 terabyte drives.
So you had mentioned 16 gigs of RAM. I also have 16 gigs because that's for VMs. He said he's going to have 8 gigs.
That's more than enough with ZFS to be able to still run other stuff on it as well. Yeah. Like my file server is also my router. I'm not running pfSense on it, but I have basically the same setup pfSense would do for me, just done manually. So it's my router. It runs VMs. I haven't, but I was planning to install like a desktop environment on it, and it's all there. And with your loader variables, you can adjust the max amount of RAM you want ZFS to use. Whether you want it to use almost everything, and then ZFS is smart. If something else is trying to use the RAM, it will free it up. But you might also say, I only want ZFS never to use more than 4 gigs of my 8 gigs of RAM so that there's always free RAM for every two things.
Yeah.
If it's going to be primarily dedicated to files, let ZFS have all the RAM. It'll free it up if you need it temporarily, but every bit that it caches is just so fast. I did a little bit of tuning with Samba, and even over Samba to a Windows 7 machine, I'm getting 60 or 70 megabytes per second copying files back and forth.
Nice. You ought to try that. If you ever boot up onto PCBSD on your laptop, you ought to try it from PCBSD to your file server, because I've read that the Samba team, Samba recognizes it's talking to the client recognizes talking to a Samba server, and you can even achieve a much higher transfer rate.
Nice. I got an even better transfer rate from the laptop running Windows 8 to the thing because it's got a better gigabit network card than my PC does.
Interesting. Windows 8 has a cool file copy. That's my favorite feature of Windows 8, hands down.
The little graph.
Yeah, I
think the other thing I like is it has a pause button now, right?
I think it does. Yeah, I've never used it though. I've never tried it because
but sometimes you're doing a big file copy and you'd like to pause and let a little file go through first.
I kind of figure Explorer would just lock up if I did that.
I know. Since Windows XP, I've used a separate tool called Copy Handler to allow me to queue and pause and rate limit file transfers.
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's awesome. I don't ever see a better than 60 for some reason to my FreeNAS box. I don't know if it's the 4 drives, or I don't know what it is. I never get above.
If you come down to the network card and the switch and other traffic and
but on the same switch, I get like 100.
Using Samba. There's some. If you can read it on the mailing list of the wiki, but if you bug me too, there's a couple of settings you can put in your samba.conf file that make a big difference. Especially if you're using
TCP
ZFS.
window size and stuff, or
I jacked the buffer size to like 256 kilobytes, but also the way the read ahead works in the asynchronous I/O. Specifically, if you're backed by ZFS, having it read just 1 byte instead of a big block means it's going to basically let the ZFS prefetch do even more work, and then it's just uber fast.
Well, it's cool. Okay, so now to put this in perspective, so on the machine we're recording on right now, there is a couple of 10,000 RPM hard drives that are in a RAID 0. Those connect back to another set of 10,000 RPM drives in a RAID 0, both running on Hackintoshes, which, by the way, are not the best network card drivers around that you can get for an operating system. However, those two machines, 101 megabytes a second, 100 megabytes a second. So I know the network can do it. So you're right. I got to play with the Samba settings because 60 is great, but if I know I can get 100, I want 100.
Yeah, because I've done some ZFS replication between two machines with server-grade Intel NICs, and I was getting over 100 megabytes a second.
It's so beautiful.
And I can't wait until I set that up with lags, so I have like 3 NICs bonded together.
Huh! All right, we should move on to David's question. Otherwise,
although I don't think that'll improve the speed of a single transfer, though. But
it's pretty wild, though, when you think about the speeds we can now get over a network. I mean, we're talking. Yeah, it's crazy.
I remember when having a whole building connected at that speed was big thing.
Yeah. I mean, I still walk into places and they're like, "Yeah, we got ourselves a T1 line, 1.5 megabits of nothing but goodness." And we got a couple of channels sliced off for our phone. So actually, we've only got 900 kilobits available, but man, is it steady. And I mean, but I remember when T1s were a big deal, and people still think it.
Well, even now, most people don't quite have that much upstream.
Yeah, unfortunately.
But
all right, so speaking of people...
I have 5 megs up.
Speaking of people who have upstream at home and want to burn it, like our viewer David here, he writes in, "Hi guys. Love the show. I have heard all of the episodes of Linux Action Show and TechSNAP. Wow, now that takes some commitment. Listening to episode 90 of TechSNAP and found the talk of running a home email server interesting. I've been running my mail server from home for about 10 years now. I still do now, of course, from time to time, have a little bit of problems getting blocked as spam. I have an ISP, Internode, who is big on keeping people's freedom. Anyways, I've been thinking for a few years now of moving my mail server to a VPS, but just finding it hard to bring myself to put my precious email somewhere outside of my physical control. Regards, David.
I would never run a mail server at home just because of the delivery problems. But at the same time, I always like to keep my mail somewhere where, like, if I can pick a server that has IPMI access, so I can have physical console to it for in case something goes wrong, I much prefer that.
I agree. And I do actually understand that I want it under my control. I want it under my house. It's because it is important to me, so I totally get what you mean, David. And if it works, the problem is not most ISPs are not as generous as apparently Internode is being in this.
Well, like we talked about the other week, the country of Brazil has decided to block 25
across the board. Yeah,
because of the same issue.
Yeah, but I'd be curious to see if David, if you do make the migration, let us know how it goes.
I would definitely consider moving your email from your house, though.
All right, our last email submission of the day comes from Z. Barnheimer? I think so. Hey, Chris and Alan. I just want to tell you that I created a web program in Perl that will generate an uncrackable password due to the length. It uses Ragnarok encryption algorithm, an algorithm that is written in Perl 5 and uses AES 13 times, changing the salt each time. You can get to it by going to http://zysys.org/pw. I put the actual code that I used to generate the password on the bottom of the page. The generated length is about 1,000+ characters each time. It uses something called cascading encryption, which is not the traditional definition. It includes a link to that. And the code is GPL, by the way. Thought I'd share. I use it with RoboForm, which is a lot like LastPass, but synchronized across platforms using AES. Keep up the great work. Very cool. So you can check out his page at zysys.org/pw if you want to generate yourself a password. Sounds like they're pretty cool.
Some pretty crazy looking passwords.
Now, you included a link here in the feedback on how to become an IT expert and get paid, right? And get paid well.
Yeah, it was just a video I saw on Slashdot that I thought a bunch of people might be interested in. It's, when you're an IT consultant, sometimes it's hard to understand what makes the difference between just being another IT guy and being that person that's sought after.
Ah, good. I
bookmarked it because I meant to watch it and I haven't got to watch it yet, but I thought other people might be interested in it.
That's what I was thinking. That sounds like something I need to watch. All right. Well, before we go to, you do have a video we're going to play. But before we get to that video, I want to just give a mention to Shark with 2 S's. It was sent in by Rawzone and via our subreddit. And check this out. Shark is a DNS-based expiration and revocation of SSH client keys. The goal of Shark is to allow expiration and revocation of SSH client keys by putting information in DNS text records. How cool is that?
I've used something similar to put the key of the server in DNS.
Yeah.
So that that warning you get the first time you connect saying, "Yeah, do you want to trust that this is the right key?" Where you'd publish the right key in DNS so that the client could check first.
Right.
Although Windows clients can't support it because of the way the DNS resolver library for Windows works. So it's not all that useful to me in the end, but it works if you enable it in your SSH client on all your Unix machines, it works quite handily.
All right. So that's very cool. So it's Shark, and it's at ssshark.org. It looks really cool.
Yep.
All right. Now we have a video. And for you audio folks, I'll do light narration because I think it's not in English. But right. Alan, do you want to set it up? What are we about to watch?
It's just a video that Stefan pointed me to, and it's this guy's a mind reader, and he's kind of
really okay. Here we go.
Reading people's minds and telling them things that they didn't think he'd be able to guess.
All right, so it starts off with it just says on the screen, "Random people were invited." Ooh, all right. What we're invited to? I don't know. They were told it was for an upcoming TV program starring Dave.
I'm guessing Dave is this guy here.
Oh, he's hugging him? Yeah, Dave is the mind reader. Oh, Dave is really making a scene. He says he sees a school in Antwerp. Insects. I feel insects on your neck. They're butterflies, because she has a tattoo. So he's just like saying random things and like, yeah, you got it. Your best friend's name is Julie. Now he's getting details about her love life on this one, Alan. Not a lot of people know that. I see a white horse. And everybody thought it was amazing. But Dave was just getting warmed up. I know your bank account number. I see a negative balance. 97.
Last month, you spent €200 on alcohol. Vorige maand €300 aan kleding gespendeerd. 8. 5 voor een huis dat van eigenaar.
I see a house for sale, he says.
€295.000.
Ja, eigenlijk.
He gives the exact number.
41.
Ja.
Is dat juist?
Ja, dat is juist.
He gave the girl her bank card number. Then the curtain falls away.
Oh my god.
And there's a whole team of people that are Google searching her.
Man.
And Facebook.
Ah, dat is, ik weet niet hoe eng.
They've pulled up all this information on them as they were sitting there. And then it says on the screen, your entire life is online, and it might be used against you. Be vigilant. Wow. Well, that's a point well taken, isn't it?
Yes.
So is that real? They were just sitting there in the room the whole time looking them up as they sat there? Because like he was giving them bank numbers and stuff.
Yep. Well, if somebody buys a house, they might say how much it was.
Yeah.
Or, if they put the address of the house they bought, you can look that up in the real estate
And if you
index.
say on Facebook, oh, I tore a muscle or something like that, you can say, how's your torn muscle?
A lot of people accidentally take pictures of the front of their bank card or credit card. I've even done it once.
Well, you could, if you want to watch the video, it is kind of fun.
And if you post a video up on Facebook and don't realize that, everybody can see the number on your debit card on the screen. Then
what I have noticed comes up a lot are in videos and photos that people take online are the house address. Like if they take a picture outside their house, you can see their house address or their license plate if their car's in the background. It's just something for people to think about. Anyways, link to that video is in the show notes if you weren't able to fully follow it.
When Stefan sent it to me, he set it up really well about, it's amazing. This guy's reading people's minds and stuff. So he kind of,
Tricked you?
not tricks you, but it gets you set up.
Piqued your interest.
You're looking for and then he's like, how's he do? And then yes.
Yeah. All right, Alan. Well, with all of those emails answered and all of those videos watched, that must mean it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite fit to the top of the show. Stuff maybe we want you to be able to go read on your own afterwards. And a lot of these links were supplied by our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. All right, Mr. Allen, are you ready for our first story in the Roundup?
Sure. This is a follow-up to last week's story about the Ruby on Rails vulnerability. Because of it and the fact that the Dutch government's DigiID system is based on Ruby on Rails, they shut the service down temporarily while they updated to the newer version of Ruby on Rails.
So this is another problem from when we talked about last week?
No, this is a story about the problem last week, which we said probably wasn't that big of a deal, actually affecting the real world by, in this case, shutting down the DigiID system the Dutch government uses for everything, including people filing their taxes. So basically, anytime you have to interact with the government, you need this DigiID system.
Wow.
And it was shut down until they could update Ruby on Rails. As a follow-up to that story, a second Ruby on Rails vulnerability was disclosed today, and a Metasploit package for exploiting it has already been out in the wild now.
Oh, lovely.
When the story broke a couple of hours ago, they're like, within the next 4 hours, we should have a Metasploit package out, but that is already out as of right now.
Oh, that's nice. Convenient.
So there's, if you just finish updating your Ruby on Rails, you got to update it again.
Wow, bad couple of weeks actually for Ruby on
Yes,
Rails.
this one is much more serious than the previous one, and it allows remote code execution, not just
Oh, really?
SQL injection.
Oh.
So someone could possibly take over with the privileges of whatever your Ruby on Rails app runs as, rather than just being able to screw with your database.
And chaos could ensue.
So I'm kind of foreseeing the DigiID system getting shut down yet again.
Yeah. Yeah, I can already see a headline for next week's TechSNAP in the making.
Yeah.
All right, should we go to the next story or any other thoughts?
It's good to see them shutting it down and fixing it rather than leaving it up and having it get exploited.
Good point. That's a great point. All right, should we talk about this Java 0 Day that's been discovered? Yep. New year, Alan. Java 0 Day. Earlier this morning, it was at Caffeine alerted this blog about this 0 Day vulnerability. New files are actually already out that allow you to reproduce the exploit, so that's great. And gosh, this Java is highly obfuscated, but based on a quick analysis we did an exploit, it's probably bypassing certain security checks, tricking the permissions of certain Java classes, just like that was seen in CVE 2012-4681. And again, probably a good reminder to disable that Java plugin in your browser.
Right. Again, this one is not a Java exploit that was found by a researcher and disclosed. This is one that's being used in one of those exploit packs. So it's actively being used to infect people's computers right now. And if I remember the schedule for Oracle, the fix might come out in April. Unless they do another emergency out-of-band fix.
Yeah. All right. This next story is interesting because we've kind of talked about NTLM a little bit on and off on the show.
Yep.
And a researcher
is posted... NTLM is the security hashing system used for things like file sharing and so on if you're on XP or older.
Yeah. NT LAN Manager, Alan.
Yep.
And this guy's claiming that it's 100% broken, remotely executable. He says to frame the conversation, there's 4 handshakes in the NTLM suite that move up in security and complexity. They are LM, NTLM, and NTLM. And, of course, there's also one with session security called NTLM v2. Now, he's managed to find a way to by the way, he took. I thought this was an interesting note. Taking advantage of Moxie Marlinspike's Cloud Cracker service. That's how he's doing this. An attacker can skip the pre-chosen challenge and brute force a challenge response to get the NTLM hash. If the victim's computer is running XP, the situation is even worse, as Cloud Cracker will return the LM hash, which can be broken overnight to deliver you the user's password.
Yes. So basically, by capturing Windows network traffic for file sharing and so on, if the user is still using NTLM, which is enabled by default in Windows XP but not in Vista and higher, you could get the password they were using to log in to access the files. Now, XP supports NTLM v2, but basically for backwards compatibility with Windows 98, NTLM was still enabled. So you can secure a Windows XP machine by going in specifically and disabling the use of NTLM and only allow NTLM v2. Although, that's not entirely safe, but because of session security, it seems to be safer.
Okay. All right. All right, Alan.
So basically, Microsoft has never provided documentation or anything to tell people how to secure the Windows XP boxes better.
Right.
And you'd think by now that they would push out like an optional Windows update or even a recommended Windows update that would change the default, but no.
Next story is just kind of a neat thing, and it takes advantage of Netflix's Open Connect network and those FreeBSD boxes with all the storage to actually deliver it. Yep. And it's interesting because we've talked a lot about the infrastructure. You've shown us pictures of these Netflix FreeBSD video caching boxes, and now we actually get to see how they get implemented in just an end-user experience. Netflix is launching their Super HD and 3D streaming. It's only available through certain ISPs, the ones that partner in the Netflix Open Connect network and take advantage of those FreeBSD boxes. And
basically, I think it is Netflix isn't going to deliver the even higher bit rates over the CDN network they have, like not from Amazon or Level 3 or something, because that would cost them more money.
Right.
But if your ISP has a deal with Netflix and has one of these Netflix boxes where Netflix isn't going to spend a lot of money to deliver it to you, then with those ISPs, you'll have the option of Super HD.
You also have to have a box that can do Super HD, so like the PS3, Wii U, Win 8, Roku, Apple TV, lots of Blue players, smart TVs, anything that does Netflix 1080p now will be able to do this. And if you want to find out if your ISP is part of this system where only, if you're one of the few that actually gets the service, go to netflix.com/superhd, and they'll tell you either a green or red little light that says your internet provider is or is not. Thankfully, mine is. So I'll be getting it soon. And this is not a commercial for Netflix. We do have a Netflix sign-up link at the bottom of our site where we get affiliate money. But what this is just, I thought it was fascinating to see how this technology is kind of, how we see it as end users now that we kind of know how it's done.
But it's just interesting that it's basically only for providers that are part of the OpenConnect network, because that's the only way Netflix can deliver it economically
cheaply enough.
Yeah. Basically, it means that the HD stream will be 5 megabits per second instead of the default HD rate now, which I think is 3 megabits per second.
Gotta have 5. And everybody's like, oh, I got 5. We gotta have 5 continuous megabits.
Yeah, you have to be able to do 5 constantly. Or rather, you have to be able to average 5. You remember, if Netflix is going to load, remember that they keep that buffer of, I think, 10 or 15 minutes ahead of where you are in the movie right now, in case, for example, they will switch computers if one fails, right? The way these OpenConnect boxes work is that they download 10 or 15 minutes ahead. So it's kind of important that you have a good chunk more than 5 megabits so that it can get ahead and then trickle load once it's ahead.
Good news for NVIDIA drivers. NVIDIA has released a fix for a dangerous display driver exploit that we talked about.
Yes, last week we talked about being able to root a machine if it had NVIDIA drivers. So NVIDIA released 310.90, which resolves that vulnerability.
That was fast.
Yeah, well, they're pretty quick with their drivers. Like, they have a regular release quite often anyway.
Bad news for those of you who saw the headline that Adobe was giving away CS2 for free this week. Not the case. Adobe's not giving away Photoshop after all. A lot of places wrote about this saying, oh my gosh, Adobe's giving it away for absolutely free. And it's pretty amazing what happened. If you read the news, you probably thought this is just like maybe some sort of marketing ploy. It seems someone somewhere got confused by when Adobe was shutting down their activation servers for the CS2 suite. They were taking offline.
CS2 is quite old now, right? They're up to like CS5.
Yeah.
And so they're shutting down the servers, and one person misinterpreted the way they were handling it for people that still had that.
Yeah.
And then, once one news site runs it, the rest just feed off of that original news site rather than authoritative sources.
Which we see all the time.
And the story gets out of hand.
And what's interesting is Adobe had a page you could get to that had the download links, and it actually had the serial number right there next to the download link. So it looked like they're giving you the download link and the serial number, and with the activation servers being shut down, you can use the serial number. Because what the way they've coded their software is if they cannot resolve, if they can't talk to the activation servers, they just assume they're offline, and they assume the serial number is good. As long as it does a basic math check.
They were replacing it with a new kind of serial number.
Right. Well, the CS2s, but the CS2 activation servers are down. So if there's bogus serial numbers floating around now, they'll start working.
Right.
Which is kind of interesting. The other reason why that's a dumb system is because if you just go in your host file and you just point the activation servers,
or if you have a firewall.
Yeah, I mean it's a dumb way to do it, but that's so. The two combinations of the things of the news cycle and all that just. It spread around like crazy. I couldn't see it. I saw it everywhere. I couldn't believe how
basically they were replacing the activation server with a different system, not going to have it allow anybody to do whatever they want.
Oh, this article said they're down now.
Yes, they're shutting down the old one, but they've come up with a system for people that still need to be able to reinstall CS2 in the future.
I think it's just there isn't any. That's the system. It still works. It lets you install.
That's not what I read. That was what the misinterpretation was.
Oh, okay. All right. So this next story, Alan, threats, vulnerabilities, and risk. This one's yours.
Yeah. It's just an interesting little image that kind of shows the relationship between those different things. Can I put the image up?
Threats, vulnerabilities, and risk. Those different things. Yeah, we have the image up.
Okay. Yeah. So if you actually look at the image, you can see what I was talking about.
I like it. And if you're listening to the audio version, Alan will have a link to that in the show notes.
Well, here, if you follow, it's kind of more of a mind map than a flowchart, but you can see that risk is a probabilistic concept, right? You're trying to figure out what might happen. But risk is calculated by multiplying threat, vulnerability, and impact. Uh-huh. And you can see that threats exploit vulnerabilities to expose assets. And assets have liabilities, and risk increases your liability. And threat agents wish to abuse or damage your assets, and they give rise to threats, right? And then your controls protect against threats and reduce your risk, but they may have vulnerabilities of their own. and vulnerabilities increase your risk.
It's like the circle of life.
Yeah. So you can see how complex the relationship between these things is.
Yeah. Yeah, that is for sure. All right. And a couple more stories in the roundup. Got a big roundup this week. Big roundup. The Dutch government aims to shape ethical hackers' disclosure practices.
Yeah, so basically they published their guidelines on how they would like to see responsible disclosure handled.
That's interesting.
It's fairly good, although they're along the lines of never disclosing it if the company doesn't want you to, rather than give them a reasonable amount of time to fix it and then disclose anyway. If a company is actively working to fix it, you should hold off publishing. But if it gets to the point where they're just stalling or not answering anymore after a while, then the best way to force them to fix a vulnerability is to publish. Right? That's the concept behind full disclosure, which means disclose it all right away. Responsible disclosure is more give them time to fix it, and if they don't make use of that, then you publish to force them to.
That's interesting they're getting involved. And
I really couldn't go over it that much because it's in Dutch.
yeah. All right. Still something it's interesting. Now I also think this is maybe a trend. I don't know. Maybe not. Yeah. For the first time, a small data breach has drawn a big fine.
Yes. So a hospice lost a laptop that contained data on 441 patients. That's a HIPAA violation and so on. And they were fined $50,000. And, it shows that just because you're small doesn't mean you can get away with sloppy security practices.
No, in fact, I think what it shows is in order to get away with sloppy security practices, you need to be really big and untouchable.
Probably.
All right. This next story bit someone in this household. I won't say her name because she's married to me and she might not like me to mention it. But Apple and Adobe were caught with the New Year's with not forward date testing. Right? Is that the right term?
Yep.
Forward date testing?
Yeah. So they didn't test their software again. What would happen if you used, a newer, like a date in the future?
Yeah.
So in this case, once that date rolled around in actuality, it caused issues.
Yeah, like phones not going out of do not disturb mode and things like that.
Yes, or not being able to go into or one of the two. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Falsehood programmers believe about time, kind of related.
Yep. Yeah. So this one, there's a whole bunch of different things, but some of the most interesting ones that you might not have thought of yourself are, number one, there are always 24 hours in a day. You think that's true, but daylight savings time, sometimes there's 23 and sometimes there's 25. Right? You're jumping ahead or back an hour. Or that, years always have 365 days. Not true, right? Or that any 24-hour period will always begin and end on the same day. Again, if a day only has 23 hours, 24 hours from a certain point won't necessarily be the next day or the same day or whatever. Or that a week will always begin and end in the same month, right? Some weeks will cross months. Sometimes you don't think of that when you're working, right? Or, a week or a month might not necessarily begin and end in the same year, right? And, then there's like a machine that a program runs on will always be GMT time zone, or the time zone won't be changed while the program is running, and a bunch of things,
The server clock and the client clock will always be set to the same time. The server clock and the client clock will always be set around the same time. Both those things are not always true.
Yes. And it's like, somebody's like, they will at least be set to the same decade. Nope. Not necessarily.
No. Things go wrong.
Yeah.
It's a good list.
Yeah. And then there's actually a second list with like 100 more of them.
He must have gotten some feedback after he posted that. Yeah, he did.
Yes, he said. And he said, these extra 70 or so were just ones that came in as comments and on Reddit.
Yeah, yep. That's funny how that works.
Or, timestamps will always be in a specific, or will always be specified in the same format, or timestamp will always have the same level of precision, meaning like number of decimals. Or timestamps with sufficient precision can always safely be considered unique, right? You're considering that, all right, if I go down to like billionths of a second or millionths of a second, then I can use the date stamp as a unique number, but it's entirely possible for two things to happen in the same microsecond or millisecond anyway.
And, we've seen things too, like where VMs will have clock drift, and it's like, how do you as a programmer...
Or if you suspend and resume a machine, you may be inside the same minute even though hours have passed.
That's weird. Yeah, it's true.
Yep.
That's very true. All right. Alan, I believe that brings us to the end of this week's show, doesn't it? Yeah? Is that all you got? You're like, yeah, I think so. Yeah, I guess so. All right.
Sorry, very distracting.
Well, now if you want to, I know, and it's all right.
Yep.
It's all right. You're a busy guy. Just we're almost done, so that's okay. This episode was live. Now you can watch live too, because then you get to join the chat room and you get to distract Alan by chatting to him about interesting bits, and you can do that over at jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is, Alan?
4 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC.
There you go, over at jblive.tv or jblive.info. Don't forget, we want to get your questions, so email them, TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com, or hit our contact link. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm twitter.com/ChrisLAS. Alan, do you use Twitter much?
Yep.
All right, so you're Alan Jude on Twitter, right?
Yes.
There you go, at Alan Jude. You can contact him or follow him over there and see what he's up to. All right, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.